of the Federation, you are much like us.
We're nothing like you. We're a democratic body.
Come now, Captain, I'm not referring to minor ideological differences. I mean that we are similar as a species. Here we are on a planet of sheep, tigers, predators, hunters, killers.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, are the opening words of our Constitution's preamble. Do we ever stop to think about what that actually means? What do I mean? Perfect union. Does that imply that we had a perfect union and we got to make it more perfect? Does it imply that we're headed towards a perfect? What exactly does that mean? Oddly enough, we were talking about this in theology class this week. It's weird, but I am taking a Hasidic theology class. It's only weird to people who don't really know me, but bottom line is, we were talking about Ichad, the concept of the unity of God. And specifically in this case, Torah and God being one and the same. And the sages had defined perfect union as two or more things that literally become exactly the same thing. They literally become one thing. It's the same concept we have in marriage, right? Two people become one. Doesn't really work out that way most times, does it? But in the case of Torah and God, it does. But this idea of the nation as a perfect union is strange, isn't it? How can you ever get all these disparate interests, ideas, states, goals to literally become one and the same thing? Can you do it? Will we ever do it? All these are questions that we find ourselves asking, especially in these days where the nation seems to be coming apart at the seams. And as it comes apart at the seams, there's a lot of discussion about, well, what happens next? Where do we head in the future? I was talking with Josh Carter from the Resistance Podcast about this a few weeks ago. Josh, this is the podcast that I said I was going to do in a couple days. I'm finally getting around to it. I've been talking with Mike Bennett about it, Milsurp writer. Where do we go from here, and is there any way to go back? There are those who believe that we are done as a republic, that there's no way that we'll ever be back to being a republic. It's just not going to work. Since republic since democracy in the dictionary was redefined to mean republic, we've talked about that in the past, there are even those who believe that we are done as a democracy, that we are not a true democracy anymore. We're certainly, if we're not a republic, then by definition we can't be a democracy anymore. Where are we headed? And ultimately, when the constitutional era ends for the United States of America, what replaces it? What do we get in its stead? Do we get a European-style social democracy where we sort of have elections and we sort of have prime ministers and cabinets and we sort of have parliaments and that sort of thing, but we also have extensive rules that control the lives of people, and we have high taxation, and sure, the government takes care of you, but they also take everything you got and then give it back. Some of it. Or do we get maybe a socialist republic? What's a socialist republic? Remember the Union of Socialist Republics? A communist dictatorship where, not necessarily a Stalinist type, but an actual communist dictatorship where, the proletariat is whatever and the people are one and the same with the government. The party and the people are the same. There are those who fear we're sliding into a theocracy. This is bizarre to me because all we talk about is how people's faith in religious items is fading, but to watch television, my God, you'd think that the Christian right has a written plan for how they're going to take over the world and force the handmaidens to do what they want done. You ever seen any of that? I haven't watched any of it. I see the trailers and it's like, what? And if you haven't seen the latest one, you should see that. I mean, it literally is pull quotes from Barack Obama. We are the ones we've been waiting for. It's weird. They're terrified of a theocracy. So would I be, but at the same time, I don't know that has a legitimate concern at this point in where we're going. Do we become a soft tyranny where we maintain the substance of our current system, but the government becomes our big brother and takes care of everything for us, makes sure that we don't burn our hands on a toaster oven or fall off a jungle gym, or we all get our vaccinations or whatever. But you're free to go, if you want to. Or do we become a hard tyranny where we have, we have all the trappings of a democracy. We have an election, but we shoot you if you don't vote the way we want you to. Do we have right-wing totalitarianism or left-wing totalitarianism? Either way, totalitarianism not good, and what is it based on, and where does it go? Does it go militant? Does it go nationalistic? What happens to it? But the question that I'm left hauntingly with is simply this. Were we ever a democracy? Were we ever a republic? I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but one of my favorite maxims is the hardest day in life isn't the day you discover you're not going to become what you wanted to become. The hardest days in life are the days you discover that you're not what you thought you were. What if we were never really a democracy or a republic in the first place? Lord Woodhousley, who is a guy that you may not know his name. Lord Woodhousley, you may not. Who? I guarantee you've heard of him. If you're at all an engaged political scientist at all, you've heard of this guy. You certainly know what he is about. You may not know his name, but believe me, you're familiar with Lord Woodhousley's ideas, at least some of them. Lord Woodhousley was a history teacher. He was also a translator. He loved translating foreign languages, but mostly he was a history teacher. And at one point he was talking about the Athenian democracies, the great Athenian democracies, and he said this about the people in the democracy in Athens. Nor were the superior classes in Athens in actual employment of a rational liberty and independence. They were perpetually divided into factions which servilely ranked themselves under the banners of contending demagogues, and these maintained their influence over the partisans by the most shameful corruption and bribery, of which the means were supplied alone by the plunder of the public treasury. Sorry, I've had to rearrange the studio a little bit, and it's kind of behind. So if you're watching the video, that's why I'm leaning to look. And if you're not watching the video, it doesn't matter. Now, you've heard some of those languages. You've heard some of that language before. It sounds plundering the public treasury. Where have I heard that before? Right? The idea that a democracy can only last as long as the politicians don't discover that they can vote themselves money from the public treasury or just plunder it and people decide. So this concept that the average lifespan of a democracy is 200 years. Remember this? This is known as the Tytler cycle. And it's something that most conservatives, particularly conservatives who have listened to talk radio for more than 10 years, have heard at great length. I'm pretty sure we've talked about it in the past. I don't remember it, nor do I have in my database exactly when we would have talked about it. But I'm sure that in the 15, 16 years I've been doing about this, I'm sure that we have made side reference to the fact that the average lifespan of a democracy is 200 years. And then this cycle that was created, you start with people in bondage. Okay, the colonists were in bondage to to Great Britain and King George. Then there's faith. There's a search for a unity, deep moral gatherings. There's courage. The people fight for their freedoms. Liberty, prosperity, and freedom achieved. 1776 to 1783. So you can almost see the arc of a story here. In the same way that there's an arc for a story of a hero, there's an arc here for a story of a nation, right? And you can go through nation after nation after nation that has gone through this arc. And then we start talking about the bad parts of it, abundance. Focus turns to material things. In other words, we stop focusing on prosperity and freedom, and we start focusing on what's it benefiting me. This leads to selfishness. It's all about me and my stuff. What are you giving me? What's in it for me? Which then leads to complacency, entitlement, self-absorption. And again, if you're paying any attention to this, your brain is going, well, Dave, that's where we are. Is it? Then we get into from complacency to apathy. Personal responsibility gets lost. It's not my fault. It's not my doing. It's somebody else's fault. And someone else should be made to pay for it. Apathy, you get freedom centralized, independence controlled. It leads to dependence, and that is the point of no return, according to the Tytler cycle, where government achieves complete control over its people and thus places them in bondage, where presumably at some point the whole cycle starts again. Faith, courage, liberty, abundance, selfishness, complacency, apathy, dependence, bondage. And around it goes. The average lifespan of a democracy then being 200 years, where it falls down shameful corruption and bribery, of which the means were supplied alone by the plunder of the public money, he said, even as he is skipping the president's speech tonight. That said, there is a problem with the Tytler cycle. And that problem is very simply, he never said that. He never wrote that down. He never had anything to do with it. It has also been attributed to Lord Woodhousley, also known as Alfred Tytler. It's also been attributed to Alexis de Tocqueville. The first actual reference to that cycle comes in a newspaper in 1959. Oddly enough, the Daily Oklahoman, my hometown, but it didn't actually contain a reference to it, just an attribution to it. It didn't contain a reference. It doesn't negate the validity of some of these things here. And some of the things that Tytler said, that Lord Woodhousley said, certainly seem to fit this idea. And he would go on to say a lot of things about democracy, which again has been redefined in the dictionary as a republic, which we may not have. He said these things. So while he didn't actually say the Tytler cycle, bondage, faith, courage, liberty, abundance, selfishness, complacency, apathy, dependence, and bondage again, and then back, while he didn't actually say those things, he did say these. These are quotes from Lord Woodhousley. I don't know why I have trouble saying that. Woodhouse is an Archer character. All government is essentially of the nature of a monarchy. All government is essentially of the nature of a monarchy. That is, it doesn't matter if you elect your king or not, they're still the king. How many times have we said that in the last, 8, 10, 20 years? Anybody? Weird, huh? It is the law of nature to which no experience has ever furnished an exception, that the rising grandeur and opulence of a nation must be balanced by the decline of its heroic values. The wealthier and more opulent a country becomes, the less value it places on its heroic values. the less value it places on the ideas and the people who brought us back to faith, courage, and liberty, and probably even abundance. We start to denigrate them. We start to see those values that those heroic people held as liabilities. We start to see them as problematic. This is what Lord Woodhousley said. And then he said this, and this is the quote that really caught my eye. Democracy is nothing better than a utopian theory, a splendid chimera, descriptive of a state of society that never did and never could exist. A republic not of men, but of angels. Now, in many ways, you know that Madison and others were familiar with the works of Lord Woodhousley. Why? Because he lived just a few years, and he said these things just a few years before the Constitution was actually ratified. And Madison would go on to use that phrase, if men were angels, in the Federalist Papers. The idea here that Woodhousley is putting across, though, is that democracy cannot and does not actually exist. This idea that we have somehow achieved a perfect union can't exist. It is a splendid chimera. Now, for those of you who, didn't take your Greek mythology courses, a chimera is a mythological beast, but not just any beast. It's not like the three-headed Cerberus that's a dog with three dog heads. It's not anything like that. It is an animal, a creation of the gods, as Homer put it, that is failed from the beginning. Why? It has the body of a lion, a goat growing from its back, a tail of a snake, wings in many cases, depending on which version of what you read. Eagle feathers. It has a mane, a male lion's head, but it's female. It is a confused mass of conflicting values and ideas. And the only thing it is good for is destruction. And this is what the chimera does in mythology, because it has no unity of purpose and no unity of existence, because it's all these different animals that are competing at the same time. All it does is destroy things. All it does is breathe fire and wreak havoc wherever it's going. Eventually, it is destroyed. It is killed by Bellerophon, who's flying on Pegasus, the winged horse. And he brings it down by a very weird, exciting way, I guess. He puts a piece of lead on a stick, long stick, and flies directly towards the chimera. And when the chimera opens its mouth to shoot out the flame hits the lead and it's deflected, and then he shoves the piece of lead down its throat and he chokes it to death. And he's destroyed this bizarre creature which never could achieve perfect unity. It could never reach a state where all of it had become one thing, one idea, one purpose. It still was a snake, a lion, a goat, an eagle. All of those things competing to be those things instead of being one thing. And the weird ending of Bellerophon's story is that nobody believes him. Even though the chimera is gone and not destroying anything anymore, nobody believes him. Nobody believes that he personally killed it. Oh, he says he does. He says he brags about it. And eventually, this all leads to his downfall, which is quite literally a downfall. Quite literally, he falls off Pegasus trying to fly to Mount Olympus. At the end of the day, the chimera could not exist because it had no unity. And in many ways, what Lord Woodhousley is saying is The idea of a nation, a democracy, has so many disparate parts that it can't actually work. It can't actually achieve its goals of democracy as a perfect democracy. You follow what I'm saying here? Were we ever a more perfect union? It's hard to argue that we were. Could it be argued that we can never be that? Under the current situation, as Lord Wolseley pointed out, where you have government that's essentially in the nature of a monarchy, where we no longer value our heroic virtues, where we are little more than politicians, power-mad people who are supplying the bribery and the corruption of liberty from the public purse. Could we ever hope to become a more perfect union? I don't personally see any way that we could under these circumstances. Does that mean that the circumstances can't change? Can we push our way back from wherever we are on the Tetler cycle, whether that's selfishness, complacency, apathy, or dependence, or even bondage, back to liberty, courage, faith? Can we back that up? Or do we have to complete the cycle? Do we have to go all the way back to bondage again before we can start over? Do we have to literally destroy the chimera before we can actually start again and try all over? Or is what he said true, and all we really are is just a splendid chimera, patting ourselves on the back for 200 plus years of history, which, again, while he didn't say the average lifespan was 200 years, I don't think he would have disagreed with that. I don't think he would have said, it's pretty much what the evidence shows, isn't it? Where do we go from here? Is Bellerophon on Pegasus and flying towards our splendid chimera with the lead on a stick? Or are we further back on that? Again, part of the problem is nobody can even agree where we are on the Tetler cycle. I'm sure there are people who believe that we're still in the liberty section, that we're still achieving prosperity and freedom. There are people that already believe that we're in bondage. Maybe we're just independence or complacency. Who knows? We can't even agree on that. So if the chimera gets taken down, well, where are we? I have my own thoughts about where we're going. I have my own thoughts about where we're going to end up. I know many of you do as well. My presumption is that a return to the Constitution of 1787, 1789 is not a viable action. It kills me to say that. I don't see how, in the present circumstances, we can ever return to even the ideas of that, if they ever even worked. There is far too much a disparity in this country right now that's not going to permit that. It's just not. There are those who believe that liberalism has become hostile to America, which would prevent that from happening. That our government is completely non-functional. I disagree. I think it's perfectly functional for what it's trying to do, which is get more of your money and more power over you. We're in debt up to our eyeballs. And even as I record this, I'm skipping the president's speech about spending another $1.9 trillion on stuff that, am I going to cash my check? Yeah. Does it really help that much in the long haul of things? No. Do we really need as a nation to be doing things? No. Incompatible worldviews. We have those incompatible worldviews. And there are those who believe that the system needs to be destroyed, that it needs to come down, that the chimera needs to be destroyed because they want to replace it with something else. Question I have for you. Dave at thedavebowmanshow.com is my email address. You know my phone number, 565-DAVE, 209-565-DAVE. You can email me. You can text me. You can leave comments here. I want to know where you think we are headed. Where are we headed? How long is it going to take us to get there? How long does the Splendid Chimera have left? This pretense that we continue to have, that we have a functioning democracy, how long does it have left before it completely implodes? What is it replaced with, and how long will that take? Those are the things that I kind of want to hear from you. I like I said, I have my own thoughts. I have my own fears. I have my own ideas about it. I have my own concerns. I don't put a lot of mustard, I guess, on the idea of a theocracy. I just don't see us heading that way. But I know some of you do think that. I know some of you believe that wholeheartedly. But what do you believe? Dave at thedavebowmanshow.com. Phone 209-565-DAVE. Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. Let me know what you think, because I'm curious, and we'll get into the rest of it maybe next time, or maybe in a couple weeks.